Hi everyone, Michael Wong here again. I'm an Australian lawyer and a registered migration agent. So in this video or in this channel, we talk about the law in Australia and migration policy in Australia. In this video, I'm going to predict what will happen in the next 1 to 3 years in Australia about the migration policy. After COVID, we closed the borders to contain the pandemic. It's reasonable. However, will it affect migration or economic growth a lot? And the answer is yes. Before we talk about migration, we have to understand what is economic growth. Economic growth is evaluated by a figure or value called GDP, gross domestic product. And the equation for GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. C is the consumption, individual consumption. I is investment. G is government expenditure. X is export. And M is import. We all understand that after the border is closed, the international travelers number has increased or decreased dramatically. International student number decreased dramatically, and working holiday maker leave the country. So we can say that the X drops dramatically, which leads to the GDP going down. So the government has to consider what to increase in C, I, G, and X, or minus the import. So the government pushed people to travel to regional area. That's why they have the policy, the half price air ticket. However, recently, what I've seen on the newspaper is the title, "Our cafes are opened, but are you being served?" That's the indication that the number of employee or the restaurant could not hire sufficient number of employees to serve their customer. We don't have enough skilled employee. Recently, the unemployment rate has dropped. However, the vacancy numbers shown on Seek.com or other employment website increased. It means that we don't have enough people, or our skills are not enough, or the skills that most Australian has cannot fulfill the requirement that the current occupations or the current vacancy required. That's why we need migration to move into Australia. This is in line with the government policy recently. On the 18th February this year, the government set up a position called Prime Minister's Envoy for Global Business and Talent Person or whatever. The aim is to attract those global business to invest in Australia and the global talent persons or people, global citizens into Australia to work to lead the economy for economic growth. In that sense, it aligns with the government policy since the World War I to attract a large number of immigration or migrants to Australia to work for Australia to increase the economic growth. Recently, on the 14th of April, 2021, I've seen an article on the Australian. Title is "The Government Clearly Planning a Return to High Immigration." And today, before I took this video, there's another article titled "BIS Oxford Economics Report Pushes for Return of Skilled Migrants." I understand that most of Australian people, most of the Australian population, they are not as welcome as in the past welcoming those migrants to Australia. However, the economists reveal that Australia needs migrants to work in Australia. As I said, we don't have sufficient skilled migrants. We don't have sufficient skilled people to work in the current economy. You can see that if there's no sufficient skilled worker in Australia, why the investor has to invest in Australia? It's simply the old migration system cannot cater the modern economical model. Why I said that? The ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics, recently announced that in July this year they will change the ANZESCO, which is the occupation list we use for migration. We choose which migration occupation can come into Australia to contribute to Australian economy. I can say that in the current ANZESCO list, there is no occupation matching for data scientists, which is the very important occupation at the moment in the modern economy. Data scientists will work in the big data field, which is a very hot area at the moment in the current IT areas. If there's no data scientists in Australia, there's no such occupation on the list. How can Australia bring those talent data scientists into Australia to work in this area? Another issue I would like to point out is the figures, the data shown by the Department of Education recently. It shows how many people, the numbers most of people who enrolled in Australia are Australian universities in different areas of professions. The number one profession is culture and history. The second one is health and then education. Then how about IT and engineering? We're talking about in this digital era, we talk about AI, we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about data science, we talk about big data, we talk about engineering, we talk about like to make the tools that suit for modern medical needs. If there's no one to do IT, no one to do engineer, how can Australia invest in these areas? Even to invest in these areas, no one is going to work in these areas. So we have to go stick for import. That's not the way Australia should grow. Australians used to be proud of themselves for inventing new stuff. The HPV vaccine, different vaccination, new things that Australians used to invent. However, recently we can see that the ranking of the university drops because they don't invest in research. No one work in this industry, no skilled people to work in those areas. Australia cannot grow the economy. That's the mindset of the government since the World War I. However, I will not say Australia is going to open the border to welcome a large influx of immigrants or migrants into Australia, because next year in 2020 there's the election of the federal parliament. I don't think those politicians will sacrifice the vote number from those Australian citizens who got the interest in them. Of course, the Australian government has to look after the interest of Australian think migrant will take their job away. However, those report or statistics show that immigrants into Australia will grow the economy, will grow their vacancy number instead of taking away their job. So that's the mindset of the Australian government used since World War I to increase the number of immigration, the migrants into Australia, to contribute to the economic Australian economy. That's our prediction. Before the election, there will be no big influx of migrants, except for those who are very high net worth global business and talent people into Australia to lead the growth of Australian economy. The second is for those who are with critical skills that can help Australia to recover the economy. And other than that, we have to wait and see until after the election next year. We're able to see a large influx of migrants into Australia, no matter they are temporary or permanent. Again, no migrants, no population. And then we have to suffer the economic growth. That's all for today. I hope you like this video and hope to see you next time.